Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the Thomas Expert Series. The Expert Series will be recorded and placed on demand, so please let your colleagues know how much you enjoyed the presentation today. Just to get everyone familiar with the chat, just let me know where everyone is tuning in from.
We are from Chicago, Illinois, a town called Libertyville, Illinois. I am Jim, and this is John.
And I'm out of New Jersey, and it's stinking hot here. It's gross, very humid.
We're on tornado cleanup today.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, we had several go through yesterday. Nothing terrible, but
Yep.
still a little scary for us.
Got Philly and Nashville in here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to John, the Vice President of SAIL, and Jim, the Vice President of Strategic Partner Management, here today to talk about best practices and emerging trends on science education.
Thank you, Heather. We're excited to be here. Again, my name is Jim Duffy, and this is John Gura, and we work for a company called United Scientific, which is, as I mentioned before, based in Libertyville, Illinois, which is a northwest suburb of Chicago. And we're thrilled to be given this opportunity by Thomas Scientific to talk about the trends in K-12 education, specifically in science education. And as we looked at each other ahead of time on this, we said, you know, we're experts on this topic because both of us have been in this particular space for 20 plus years each. And working very closely on the product side of what educators use to be effective in classrooms. We've been privileged to have quite a bit of interaction with teachers at all different levels, K-12, higher education, post-secondary, all kinds of things. And also work very closely with product developers, some really sharp minds trying to develop the products that can help teachers to be more effective in what they're doing in the classroom, and ultimately with the purpose of having an impact on students to make education memorable.
As Jim mentioned, I'm John Gura. I've been in the industry for 20 plus years as well. And my role is very similar to what Jim had mentioned. One of the focal points I had in my role is I'll work as the bridge between the product developers and the manufacturers to the distributors of products such as Thomas Scientific that gets some of these products into the schools and classrooms and into the hands of students. So my purpose to start here is, what are we going to cover today? And I'm going to start by using 3 words, and we're going to remember these and we're going to see how they tie in later. We're going to talk about gambling. We are going to talk about launching watermelons, and we are going to talk about playing the trumpet. So I'll let you try to think and figure out how does that tie in. But now a little bit more structured, what are we going to do? We're going to discuss science and STEM proficiency among students and why that is important. And for anyone unfamiliar, and I think the term's been around enough now where it's becoming pretty common. STEM is an acronym amongst many acronyms that Jim will get into later in the industry for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And again, we're going to talk about why is that important to develop a scientific thinking in both real world and in scientific environments. And how does hands-on learning help that? How does hands-on learning develop those type of minds that will make those scientific or STEM-based decisions that'll lead to success in professional and scientific life? And we're talking about, recent trends in hands-on science. What are we seeing in the classroom? What's changing? And tying that in, what type of techniques are being used in the classroom to enhance learning and through a hands-on method?
Now, as I mentioned, we are very fortunate to interact with educators and have been doing that for quite a while. I want to make clear up front that while we're self-styled experts on the product side of things because of time served and understanding what it takes to have a device, that apparatus that is effective in a classroom environment, we are not teachers, have not been classroom teachers ourselves, but very adjacent to it. And also because of that, pay a lot of attention to what's going on in education in this country at the national level, and certainly even in our hometowns. And we've been lucky to meet a lot of people over the years that are doing some really impactful things for students. Here in Chicago, for example, I was very closely associated with an organization for years that put science labs in the west side of Chicago schools and the south side, with the objective of trying to get some equity in terms of the experiences of learning about science, that those particular schools just didn't have the budgets normally to do it. So it was an external party, a local hospital, that was making it a community outreach effort to try to make a difference. And from our point of view, U.S. education in general, right now, there is that disparity, and the stats are out there. Some of you may have seen recently, just a couple of weeks ago, there was the National Assessment of Educational Progress that released test scores on math and reading, not science, but math and reading, and how we're doing as a country. Students are doing post-COVID. And learning loss is a term you've all probably heard. It's a very real thing out there, and those scores were disappointing. There is a concern on a national level that students really need a lot more support to be effective. And part of that is, we firmly believe, and we'll get deeper into this, is hands-on learning can really help to make the connections that make a difference for students. John mentioned STEM before. There's all different variants of it: STEM, STEAM, STREAM. STEAM is adding the arts aspect to it. STREAM adds reading. Basically, the whole goal of all this is to try to make a difference in terms of the quality of education for students. For us, it's a lot of it's academically, but it's also just the general, this bullet where we say GDP is the sum of its parts. The people are the future. It really is important for this society and the world at large to have a literate populace in terms of science knowledge, along obviously with math and reading. How are we doing? We'll get a little bit more into that on the local, regional, national, international levels. In short, we're still not doing as well as we should be. The workforce of tomorrow is really important. Some of you may be familiar with things like the CHIPS and Science Act that's out there now. There's a lot of government funding trying to encourage us bringing manufacturing jobs back to the United States. Some of that's happening, but there's also a real crisis in terms of having qualified workers to fill some of those roles. So it's important that students develop a strong interest in science and technology, other related topics, subjects at a young age. And those young minds are an opportunity, not only in terms of developing that workforce for tomorrow, but also the fact that they can develop into better decision makers, problem solvers, have those life skills that are so important to be effective no matter what they choose to do in their daily lives. Part of it is what's going on with science right now is that we don't really have at the national level, or even so much at state levels, standardized assessments. That's kind of can be somewhat of a term that can get reactions from folks. But as a result, because it's not being assessed, there's not as much emphasis on science at the young levels. And there was a wonderful report that came out in the last couple of years called The Call to Action for Science Education from the National Academies of Sciences that talks about that. So the idea is that we need to have a more literate society to make a difference. So I'm going to hand it over to John to talk in a minute here.
Yep. So when we talk about aligning with expected outcomes, I love the analogy of the fork in the road that's on the screen. And what that means is every decision that a person makes, you have that decision to make. Do you make the fast decision that has the solution right in front of your face? Or do you take that other fork in the road that maybe has that long-term decision using a scientific method and aligning with what the true expected outcome is? So one of the cleanest examples we see all the time is something like taking a car title loan. Now, the immediate to the left on the fork of the road there is I get my funds right now, and it solves an initial problem sitting right in front of me. But as you use more of a scientific method of, well, what happens when I do this? What happens when I do this? What happens to then after that? You realize that that option, one, probably puts your vehicle in jeopardy throughout the tenure of the loan, but also it's an extremely high interest rate. You're ending up paying a very high cost for money to solve a problem initially in front of your face that probably creates several more additional ones. And one near and dear to me is I'm a amateur blackjack player, and I enjoy playing cards, taking trips with my wife, and we see it all the time when folks are playing in specific blackjack. And here's where we get into our first point we talked about earlier about one of the 3 points we're going to hit is blackjack. And what I see so many times is the scientific way of looking at blackjack, and it takes take out card counting and things like that. That's so minor and so few can do it. But the outcome of the following hand has the same chances of the outcome of the hand you're currently being dealt of the hand before that. And what you see a ton of is what I call chasing the loss. So what people will do is you'll see them lose a few hands in a row. And blackjack, for those who don't play, it's fairly close to a 50-50 draw. The house always wins, so they have a slight advantage. But in theory, you should be pretty close to half and half of what you do. And what we see is people start losing, and what they do is they take that 50-50 chance away, and they take that slight house edge and just blow it out of the water by trying to chase. I'm going to double my bet. I'm going to double my bet. And that little bit of edge that the house has, science would have told you don't do that. Stay back and play your regular pace. And that's some of the decision-making that learning to work scientifically can do. Now, it's important to think back, what's something you remember from science class? And I'm willing to bet that just about anybody that watches this video, nobody will reference, well, one of my favorite memories was reading chapter 4 in my textbook and memorizing the key terms. Science is such a hands-on thing that you remember when you got your hands on the product and how you got to that thought. And one that Jim's heard this story several times. I always keep it in my head because for one, I love the experiment, but two, I learned something. And we were doing a section, it was on motion and gravity and force and velocity. And one of the demonstrations we had to do in our group of students is we were all given these round watermelons. There's part 2 of what we were going to talk about. And we had a ramp on top of the bleachers at the school. And we had to drop this watermelon to roll down the hill off of the bleachers, but we had to take this rope and make a circle on the ground of where that watermelon was going to land. Now, as a student, everybody loves when there's a catastrophic explosion or mess. So that had our attention to begin with. But realistically, we had to take scientific thought and knowledge, calculate the weight of the watermelon, the angle of the ramp. We had to do test runs to see what the speed of the watermelon was just going down the ramp. What's the rate of gravity? What's the wind speed? And it's kind of odd. I think today, and that was many years more than I care to count, I'm pretty sure I can get that watermelon in a circle today because it stuck with me. It was a hands-on learning that stuck with me. So now let's, I'm going to turn it over to Jim for a second, and then we're going to get into a little bit of hands-on product. How does that work?
Now, John mentioned at the outset here, and hopefully that hooked you, is the idea of gambling and watermelons. And the third component that he mentioned was trumpet. And how do those 3 things tie together? Well, I'm going to tell you, I mentioned a minute ago about the National Academies of Sciences and their call to action for science education, which I highly recommend. It's a publication that came out about a year and a half ago. And it's downloadable from the National Academy's website. Tremendous resource as an overview of how science education can be more effective in this country. I'm going to switch slides here as I get into this, but one of the quotes from there as we were preparing for this talk, I thought this really summarized it. John's watermelon story covers it very well too, but this is a statement taken verbatim from the call to action that talks about, well, it'll be self-explanatory when you hear it. I'm going to quote, read this. If a person wants to learn to play the trumpet, they need to blow air into it, figure out how to position their lips on the mouthpiece, and what valves to press to produce the right sounds. They need to experiment and discover, not read about trumpet playing in a book. The same applies to learning science. Reading about science in a book, listening to someone talk about it, or memorizing key terms will not get the job done. That, in short, is what we tend to live every day here at United Scientific as we interact with teachers and companies that provide products to teachers. That's what they're looking for, those kinds of tools. And I'll let John talk further about that now.
Well, and the beauty of hands-on learning and hands-on products is, you know, the tab we have there is still going strong after all these years. And what do we mean by that? Well, one, obviously, as Jim mentioned, playing the trumpet, that's not something new. You know, that goes back over 100 years of people learning how to do that and make those noises. I even go back further. One of the basic concepts of science that is taught to students is gravity. And, you know, there was probably no more hands-on learning experience than when Newton got hit in the head with the apple. Some would call it a heads-on product, but it would translate to hands-on. So hands-on products have been going strong for many years and have been a proven technique and strategy that's worked. They've just evolved a little bit over the years. And where does our role as a manufacturer and tied in with Thomas as a distributor to get these products out is we make the products, but it's the teachers that make the magic. And it's great that there's so many of these products out there that there's no right or wrong way to use them. There could be a suggested way of here's how you use a product. But once you get these products in the hands of teachers, teachers become the vessel for inquiry, for getting students to think in different ways. What else could we do? But now, more importantly, things that have changed over the years of hands-on product is safety. You know, I'm sure we've all seen, you know, some of our parents or parents' stories about the chemistry kits they had when they were kids. And I'm sure they probably included mercury and other such lovely safety inhibitive products. And that's sort of changed over the years now too. So the goal that we have as putting hands-on products in that we understand that the teachers respect and use too is a three-prong approach. One is safety. Products for hands-on teaching need to be safe. You need to have the students in the best position to, one, not hurt themselves, not hurt others, or damage the environment around them. Reliability. I'm a parent of 2 teenagers, and I can tell you, if you try to show them the right way to do something and the tool doesn't work, they're harsh. They don't forget that. They'll forget the 20 things you taught them. They'll always remember the one time you showed them something that doesn't work. So it's very important that the products we put into the hands of the teachers or the lessons that they do, that the products work, that the demonstration works. They have to be reliable. And then value. Budgets are very tight these days, particularly in the schools. You know, science is only a small part of this education budget, and we've got to be able to put products out there and get items into the hands of the educators that can stretch and make that budget a reality.
And in terms of where products have gone these days, clearly technology has advanced at an ever increasing rate. So there are so many great resources available online in terms of simulations. It wasn't that many years ago that the first simulation of dissection, for example, came out. A close friend of mine was the one who developed it. And it's a great augment to how to learn. And in fact, in that example, he was a science supervisor in schools and worked with some of his teachers to develop this dissection simulation software. As the guy who developed it, he very clearly said, this is something that is a great way to prepare in advance for a dissection. It's a great alternative for those who may have a reason why they don't want to perform dissections, which is understandable. And it's also a great after the activity way to review it. So technology certainly has a place, but at the same time, it's important to understand the analog before digital. And by that, a great example of that is United does not sell scales or balances, but we have friends in the industry who do. And it's amazing. If you think back to when you were in school, I'm guessing most of the viewers of this remember this. In fact, you would, no matter what your age is. There's a balance called the triple beam balance, which has a pan on one end. It's got 3 beams, and you slide the weights, the sliders, to determine the mass of what you have on the pan. That is a way to learn about what it means to understand the mass of an object. You've got a hands-on activity of sliding those values to get to that amount. That product, back when I was selling them directly for a company that I worked for that was selling directly to schools, we would sell thousands of those every year. And as I talk to people in the industry, even though there's tremendous digital scales and digital balances that are out there now, those analog ones are still selling thousands per year. And why is that? Because people need to know the analog before they go digital. Think about like a clock, right? Being able to see, understand, tell time on the wall with a clock or a wristwatch that has the hands. It's that kind of information you need to understand before you see the digital readout. And it's all part of the learning. You have to understand the analog, why something got to this point where it is digital. And many of the hands-on products that are out there now use those kinds of concepts to really get folks to understand the fundamentals before they can see the objects they might be buying or using in their daily lives. They're no longer a black box mystery. They understand that. And this really starts as early as the elementary level. There are many kits that are out there produced by companies, various activities that can get students interested. For example, on the slide here, you see this image of these two young students working, wearing goggles and doing some sort of chemistry experiment. They've got the hands on there, and that may very well be something that is an activity that's included, where the materials are included in a kit that they get that they can use in their classroom. And for teachers, the reality of teachers these days is, especially at the elementary level and even into junior high, there's not specialists in very many locations who are teachers in that specific science discipline. So they're somewhat generalists on things, and oftentimes they find themselves thrust into teaching a topic that they weren't classically trained in. That wasn't their emphasis when they were getting their teaching degree. So we have found more and more products that we put out there for teachers to use. They're very appreciative of activity guides that are included in the products. And these are authored for us, and other companies do the same thing, by experts in the field. We have a team of product developers who are, many of them are former classroom teachers themselves, PhD physicists, high-level researchers, biochemists, who put together these activities. We've got the product, the apparatus that you would use, but also the activities that are laid out very clearly for how the teacher can facilitate using this product in a classroom. That's an essential part for a hands-on product of a trend that's gotten so much better in recent years. And that's on the product side. The other thing that we want to talk about a little bit is just classroom trends of how we learn. Our pieces of apparatus are part of the story, but more and more inquiry-based learning is the general umbrella term that's used for it, is so important. And you've probably heard the term PBL, which can stand for either project-based learning or problem-based learning. And the difference really is a project goes on a longer time period. It's over the course of a semester or even an entire academic year, whereas a problem-based learning is more of a scenario that can be accomplished in one classroom period or over the course of a week, that kind of thing. And really what is common with them is that they begin with a scenario, a challenge, saying, we have a problem that needs to be solved. How do we go about solving it? And for students, it gets them involved early on in the process, where they assess, okay, here's a scenario, here's a situation where I've been presented with this issue. Somebody needs to figure out a way. There's a challenge at a scenario of, say, for example, we're going to move to another planet. We're going to have interplanetary travel, and we need to design a rover for use on Mars. If we're going to go to Mars, what does it look like? What kind of materials should this have? How should it be structured? Students look at it and they say, okay, what do I know? What do I know about Mars? What do I know about how rockets work? What do I need to know to understand what the environment is, the atmosphere on Mars? So they go through a process of, what do I know? What do I need to know? What don't I know about? And that's where the facilitators, the teachers, intervene and really help them, to guide them to understand the learning issues they may have, to help to put together their ultimate recommendation. And on the bullets that you're seeing on the screen now, open inquiry versus guided inquiry, what I just described was more of a guided inquiry approach, where rather than dropping a bunch of products, components on a table and saying, make something out of this, students, the guided inquiry says, we're trying to solve a challenge that just came up, and I'm going to help you as the facilitator, as the teacher, to determine the steps to take to get to where you need to ultimately solve the problem, with the understanding that the students are using their own initiative throughout and using their creative thinking, their problem-solving skills, and really trying to understand how to think as a scientist would think, to be able to make decisions. John mentioned earlier about the title load on the car, right?
Mhm.
That kind of concept of being able to assess, do I do that or don't I do that? It's a matter of just looking at what I know and gee, should I really do this? What's going to be the repercussions of that? That's the whole scientific method, as we used to call it. These days, a term that's used a lot more is design thinking about how to really make a good decision. Another piece I really wanted to mention on that too is real world connections. That's something that's a trend that is that can't be overemphasized, is for students where it's memorable, it has to relate to the real world. And in that case, it's not necessarily the macro world out there, but it's their real world. We've interacted with students and teachers telling us about scenarios of students who live an hour from the beach, but because of their circumstances, these students have never had a chance to go to the beach and really understand what sand even looks like. So when you're talking about kits and hands-on activities, it needs to relate to the environment that the students are operating in so they can relate it to what their lives are like. But also then by doing that, help to expand beyond that. In that example, bring the sand to them so they can understand it. Hopefully, a situation where they can take a field trip and get to the beach and see what it's all about. But trying to make those connections to make it memorable. Anything that you see in terms of education, in terms of the hands-on items, should be all with that objective to try to make some neural connections happening so that students do remember it, like John remembers that watermelon. That's the kind of thing that we probably all have those examples in our lives that we can carry with us for a nice long time.
Everybody should have the opportunity to toss a watermelon off of the bleacher.
They should, for sure. And quickly, some other techniques that are part of it, just sort of some bullets here. Again, these are things that we've learned from teachers that we interact with. One thing that I think is very cool, a friend of mine talks about is when you're doing something, you see on the slide now, these students all working together, collaborating on an activity, an electronics activity. They're designing what seems to be like a rover themselves. It's the idea of the group of one, where when a scenario is presented, where there's a situation, it's great for the students to sit down by themselves rather than working in this example, as you see on the slide, a group of 5 students all collaborating together. Wonderful to get to that point and all the good things that come with it, the collaboration aspect of it. But it really starts with every student having a voice in it. So the group of one is you're presented with the challenge, sit down by yourself, write some notes, give it some thought, and come up with how you think this particular activity should proceed.
And I think that, Jim, not to cut you off, but specifically that example there is a good example of an emerging trend. You know, when my kids are, I had mentioned they're college age now. When they were in school, group of one was not a trend in the classroom. That is emerging now. And that kind of plays into the topic of our discussion today about emerging trends and how things are changing.
That's right. And what happens from that, though, too, is that just to complete that thought, is it starts with a group of one, but then it can go to a group of 2 where you've got your notes, you think how you want to proceed, but you then, John and I would be, after we wrote our individual ideas, we'd collaborate on it and try to come up with what we think is a consensus on it. And then you would go to the larger group. And what it does is it gives everybody in the group the opportunity to have a voice in it. And you've got some creative thought coming in. In this example, like on the slide, 5 different perspectives coming in to try to address the topic. And it just makes it that much more satisfying for everybody involved. And by social support on there, that relates to the collaboration. It's should be understood. And this is happening more and more in educators that I interact with. I love to see the classroom techniques to make it a safe place in terms of social support, where everybody has a chance to say what they think and everybody's helping each other out. And it just really, it makes it a very robust learning environment. And again, that's kudos to the educators that are doing it. Like John said before, we make the products, teachers make the magic. The great teachers out there are making it something where the students get charged up, excited about what's going on. One other thing that, one last bullet on here I wanted to mention, then I'll turn it back over to John, is informatics. And by that, what we're talking about, more and more of the kits that we're producing and that we're seeing out there are recognizing that there's so much metadata in the world, and mathematics is such a key part of it, right? I was at a meeting a few weeks ago, and an educator used a statement with me that I'd not heard before. She said that math, science is what happens if math and reading get together and have a baby. So you really need to have skills in math and reading to be effective in science. It shouldn't be, and this is my opinion here, it shouldn't be something where you've got math and reading before you start learning science. They should be coming up together, learning together. But what's nice about it with hands-on activities, because there's such great data sets out there now, in terms of mathematics, it's a lot of times you'll do a hands-on activity, and part of going further is to then look at data sets because of the skills you've acquired in this hands-on activity, this design thinking, this real-world connections, the idea that I'm a good problem solver and decision maker. You're able then to analyze a data set and form some conclusions from it, where that has implications for our world is things like climate change, for example, right? Looking at the data that's out there, identifying trends, coming up with recommendations as to how to proceed. So much of that is rooted back into this learning that you're seeing on these slides of these students playing around with things, getting their hands dirty, learning how to play the trumpet instead of reading about how to play the trumpet in a book.
Next slide. Yeah, and kind of just to tie it up and put a bow on this, one, we want to thank you for your time. And what we wanted to have come out of this discussion is, one, this is something that Jim and I are very passionate about, is keeping hands-on learning and keeping it evolving and growing and different trends in the industry, not only to get the right science-minded folks into the science industry, but we hope that this hands-on learning translates into teaching that student when they become older that car title loan should be a last option, not a first option. Don't chase the ace when you're playing blackjack. And probably most importantly, drop that watermelon in the circle. Learn how to do that. But the whole reason is take the scientific thought based on actually doing it, getting your hands on it, and real world application, and continue to develop and evolve that. So we want to, again, on behalf of Jim, thank you so much for your time, for listening to us and hearing our thoughts on emerging trends and hands-on science. And we look forward to seeing where this develops. So thank you from on behalf of Thomas Scientific, from us here at United Scientific. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
All right. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to stick them in the chat. And while you're doing that, I do want to go ahead and take a moment to share my screen to show you a promotion that is running right now. All right, so inside of United Scientific's kiosk, you will see that there is a promotion available to you. And here there is also a survey that you can take, as well as some literature, web links, and videos. In here as well is the on-demand talk. So any talks that we have had previously, they're all hanging out in here. So please be sure to explore in here, as well as the Thomas Center. You can get there from the lobby and enter the Thomas Center and check out those guys as well. And this talk will be on demand by tomorrow, so it'll be up in this tab. So if you guys wanted to bring in anyone else, be sure to go ahead and check that out. And I'll hand it right back to Jim and John if there's anything in the chat.
Is there anything in that?
I'm not seeing any question. Well, here's something. Let's take a look. Sarah, thank you. Thank you for your comments.
Yes.
Yeah, we're thrilled, and as John said, we're very passionate about this. It's, you know, the other aspect of it is really which we touched on, but is so worthy of emphasis, is just the pipeline again of workers as we go forward. And that's where what the folks at Thomas Scientific are doing, and we stand behind it, supporting it in terms of the products, is really helping to outfit researchers, educators, and the ultimate benefit of that is for the pipeline of workers for tomorrow. And as I said a couple of times, more importantly, I suppose, is just making sure that our general populace, all of us, have that degree of literacy to make good decisions in our lives. One of the folks that I used to work with who was very passionate about it, he would always distill it down. He spent a lot of his time volunteering to help out students in inner city schools. And he just summarized it very simply as it's all about the kids. And it really is. I think it's our obligation to do what we can to help the next generation to be as knowledgeable as they can be, to be as effective, and hopefully have as lives that are as enriching as possible for themselves. So
Well, the students
very
of today,
important
Jim, are the ones that are going to have to take care of us when we're on our end.
That's right.
We want them to be as strong as possible.
That's right. Yes. Watch out for our children. They're here to replace us. Right.
That's right.
Yeah, that's it. So. But okay, I don't see any other questions. Thank you for the comments that are coming across. But if there aren't any questions, we could just keep talking, but you probably don't want us to do that. So, but thank you so much. It's really a great opportunity for us. And thanks as always to our great friends at Thomas Scientific.
Yep, we appreciate everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, guys, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Sure will.
Take care.